So thank you all for coming to this semester's second event in the Department of English, Rhetoric, and Writing's reading series. It is my honor now to introduce to you Charlotte Pence. Professor Pence is the author of Many Small Fires, a book of poems, as well as 2 poetry chapbooks and a handbook which merges creative writing with composition entitled The Writer's Path, Creative Exercises for Meaningful Essays. She also is the editor of the Poetics of American Song Lyrics. Pence's writing has received fellowships from the Tennessee Arts Commission and the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, among others, and her awards include the Discovered Voices Award, the New Millennium Writing Award, and multiple Pushcart nominations. Her poetry, hybrid prose, and creative nonfiction have been published or are forthcoming in Harvard Review, North American Review, Denver Quarterly, Prairie Schooner, Southern Review, and many other journals. Currently a professor at Eastern Illinois University, where she directs the Lions and Winter Literary Festival and the Hennings Reading Series. She also serves as the editor of Blue Stem magazine. Pence received her Ph.D. in creative writing from the University of Tennessee and grew up in Rome, Georgia. In the author's note that begins Many Small Fires, Pence writes that the collection is ecological in its primary sense, meaning it hones in on our physical and emotional connections and acknowledges nature's role in our lives. Braiding science, anthropology, and memoir, Many Small Fires remarkably weaves a difficult family history with the history of the extended human family, particularly Homo floresiensis, a distinct species commonly referred to as the Hobbit people because of their short stature, recently discovered on Flores, a remote island of Indonesia where Pence traveled. It was here that Pence began to reflect on her childhood, and this book began. In one poem, which opens in Indonesia, Pig and a Bottle, the speaker, present at a funeral sacrifice, cheers a pig's escape from grill and grave. Just at that moment, feeling a warmth wet her leg, as a machete opens a buffalo's throat, its blood spraying like water from a sprinkler. But a still more chilling moment is yet to come, as the poem turns inward to memory, how, she says, Dad loved to tell her what he could do with the beer bottle's broken neck, how the human throat, he said, gives like a pillow. In Architecture of the Veil, she notes how in Islamic architecture, the interior, rather than the exterior spaces, are often what is adorned. There, the mosaics repeat and spin their cobalt patterns. This brokenness, she writes, we suspect is true about our own selves, despite the fluid strides we make from city block to city block. The poems of Many Small Fires explore the breakage, not just of the paranoid schizophrenic mind and the skeletal remains of our newly discovered relatives, the men in those caves being cleaned with pastry brushes that wipe bone from bone. For, as Pence writes, we all live on pieces and attempt to piece all into place. Art, like healing, lies not in denying this breakage, but in what composition is made of the shattering. The poem, Charlotte Pence writes, is its own world in which each line break, each detail, each letter depends on what comes before and after, in the same way a bone needs another bone to become a body. The poem's only incompleteness is its need for a reader. It is truly our gift to be the listeners tonight to complete this powerful work. Please welcome Charlotte Pence.
tonight? You good out there? Let's see. Is that sound? Is that sound? Do we need this?
It's not on mute. It's green.
It's green. Right there. Well, okay. I'm hearing something, I think.
We can hear you.
Okay, good. If you can hear me back there, we're good then. Well, thank you guys for having me here to Berry College, Rome, Georgia, where I lived from the ages of 6 to 12. And a lot of stuff goes down between those ages of 6 to 12. I'll talk a little bit about that later with some of my poems. But I heard that it's fall break tomorrow. So I thought I would begin with reading a poem that's not my own. It's by Russell Edson, and it's called The Fall. Russell Edson's known as like the godfather of the prose poem, really interesting, surreal, fable-like poems, and I thought this one would be appropriate for tonight. The Fall. There was a man who found 2 leaves and came indoors, holding them out, saying to his parents that he was a tree. To which they said, then go into the yard and don't grow in the living room, as your roots may ruin the carpet. He said, I was fooling. I am not a tree, and he dropped the leaves. But his parents said, look, it's fall. Thank you. I think that's a really funny poem, too. All right. So I'm going to begin with a poem from my new collection. When I spoke to Dr. Meek's classes earlier, someone asked me about this poem in particular. It's called Space Bears and Doxology. So this poem began for me, from news reports that I read of people along the Smoky Mountains. We moved to Knoxville when I was about 13. And so this poem began with me reading the local papers there. And there were reports of people calling in, complaining about bears running through their yards wearing space helmets. And so at first the cops ignore it, thinking everyone's just smoking the same thing. But it persists for about a month, and this is what they found. Space bears and doxology. First reports described a runaway bear wearing a space helmet. I'm not surprised. It is Tennessee, and black bears gone alien are a possibility. Here, life not as it seems is the hope. So after a month, wildlife rescuers tracked the scat to find a juvenile male with his head stuck in a plastic Walmart candy jar. Bulk-sized juju fruits, honey of all hives. The vet judged the bear one winter away from death, having lost half its body weight. He had learned to drink by lying down in shallow streams where the water would seep in slow enough to keep him from drowning. This story reminds me how, as a child, I sewed pink curtains onto roach motels, figuring they would like it better this way, both coming and going, the curtains a lure and an escort. I know the bear doesn't debate about any of this. But if there were such a thing as heaven, wouldn't it be the moment the jar was removed, that rush of autumn air on his face, no barrier between paw and tongue, touch and taste, the world as it is now and ever shall be, suddenly right before him, roughing cheeks with sun on autumn mornings, and if he's lucky, pricking his eyes with a sting of sleet come winter. So for you guys in the back, if you'd like to move on up a little closer, since the mic isn't working so great, and then you might be able to hear me better, but feel free to come rustle if you need to come rustle. So let's see, how much can I move? Okay, I can move around. Okay, good. I'm going to, we'll go back to Many Small Fires here in a little bit, but I'm going to read a couple of poems from this little limited edition chapbook. When I was working on my Ph.D. at University of Tennessee, at one point I was taking 2 different poetry workshops at the same time. I do not recommend that. One was a received forms class, another was, just more, foot loosey-goosey. But it was a lot of poems, and I found myself when I got done that semester wanting to write something I couldn't accomplish within a week. And so what I did was I wrote this chapbook, which retells the story of Penelope's fidelity to Odysseus. Just to kind of remind you guys, remember Odysseus, he was gone for 20 years, but his faithful wife, Penelope, was just by the loom the whole time. So I rewrote this set in Nashville, Tennessee, which is the Athens of the South, as you know. And I gave another reason for why Penelope was by the loom all the time. She was having an affair and waiting for the guy to come visit. So I'm going to read just a couple of sections from this one. And this is just to let you know in this series. So this chapbook deals with what happens when Odysseus does come back and they're having some marital discord. This is section 3 from Leaves a Clear Night. The Trojans kept Helen for 12 years, winning at least a little while. So often we focus on the loss rather than the years of attainment. But any love that matters will one day be taken for granted. I think of how many nights I slept next to my husband on wrinkled sheets, warm where the dog curled, cold by my feet. As his hand grazed my thigh, I realized he hadn't touched me all day. Each morning when I woke, I understood he was an eagle scanning the next ridge. The bed heaved as he rose first, his steps hard, stiff, while the erupting sky behind him eased from gravel gray to blue. He didn't glance back at the soft curve of my body, not yet rigid with the day's to-dos. But what he would do was place cereal and fruit in a bowl, then call my name, the milk cold, the peach sliced. Without motive or need, we slept, ate, read, breathed together, him running a hand under my shirt whenever he wanted. But I was talking about Helen, about how she loved as she wished at least once, willing to witness the loss of a world for it. So this continues with Penelope thinking if she has the guts to leave Odysseus. And I'll read one little poem from this. When he returned, the first thing my husband did was search for his favorite pair of yard shoes. He passed through the kitchen toward the yellow back door. I stood at the counter, swiping spilt pepper grounds into a blue rag. He stopped, wrapped his arms around my waist from behind. Passion is the word for that. But I don't know the word for what else it is. That web being hooked and crossed in the basement while we sleep above. One strand attached to the shiny bicycle spoke, another attached to the rusted nail head that juts from the basement post. As Dr. Meek mentioned, I do like to go to other countries or just other states or just to the park down the street to get a little bit of research for my writing. But this began a long time ago for me. I think before I realized I wanted to be a writer, I was doing a study abroad program in Ecuador. And one thing they had me do was go to an orphanage one day. And I just really wasn't prepared for the emotional toll that would be. Instead, I came with a bunch of toys, thinking I would be doing everybody a great service as I came there and did some cleanup and passed out little dolls. So this next poem I want to read is called Sometimes When a Child Smiles, and talks a little bit about that day. Sometimes when a child smiles, mouth open wide and greedy, even the molars exposed, it reminds me of a single afternoon when I'm passing through an orphanage in Ecuador, distancing myself with one-armed hugs and toy store gifts. I toured cafeteria-sized bedrooms guarded by bougainvillea flowers scratching at windows, frowning palms standing shoulder to shoulder. And outside the girls' windows, Under the garden's uncut hair rested its secret everyone knew and no one believed. And I know the rules. I should not repeat it. Should resist telling a story about orphans. Yet how can I ignore it when the sun angles from the west at 5 o'clock in May, when light's neither new nor old, but that color of freshly squeezed lemonade, and it slices across a child's face at that silent moment between grin and the laughter. And it's the smile of the girl who led me to the garden to where she found the baby. But that's too common for this story. It's this. For 2 months, the 6-year-olds hid the newborn. They snuck cartons of milk under their navy cardigans and let the baby suckle off their fingertips. One girl chewed her food and spit it inside the child's mouth like she'd seen dogs feed their pups. And they named her Caramella, a candy they wanted, and made her so content the nuns never heard her cry. Sometimes when a child smiles, I have to look away, for I know I could not do what those girls did. I could not accept a secret without fearing it, and I could not spit into a child's mouth and know this too is love. All right, so let's see here. I think I'll switch gears a little bit and go back to this book. I'm going to read this poem called Ag Research that it's kind of a funny thing. When I was an undergraduate, I gave myself the little task to choose the class that I knew the least about and have to take it. Which is a scary question to ask yourself. What are you the most ignorant in? So I decided, for me, at that moment, I have a different list now, but at that moment it was farm animal management. So I signed up for a class over in the vet school where I was given my own sheep for the semester, and I was supposed to train this sheep and to walk on a 2-finger touch, but I messed up, and whenever I asked her to turn right, she would fall on her right-hand side, and left, she would fall on her left side, and then I never could give her a signal that said to get up, so we'd have to wait for the other sheep, who were smarter, to go by until she would follow the sheep. But anyway, in many ways, me putting myself into this situation that doesn't fit, I think is very much how metaphor works. You take two things that don't seem to go together, and you have to figure out why they do go together. And if you do it right, you can create a new thing, a new life in a way. This is called Ag Research. We didn't understand what we were holding, but knew both penis and vagina on the piglet meant something. We answered its squeals with clucks and shush, took note of its moonish hard belly, sang Twinkle Twinkle to distract from the ear tag's needle and punch. My body was not the body the piglet longed for. No mother's teat, swollen and flabby, spritzing milk. No fur slick with manured hay to wallow in warm. But song is song. Sailors, chain gangs, boys with Corvettes, and girls with Hondas, we need song. I broke a flute once to get inside the soft pads of each key, found only metal and holes and cold. That's the way with searching, isn't it? We think we know before we know. In this world, even babies hear their names before they're born. So that poem opens up, for me, a couple of questions about belonging. Who do we belong to, if anybody? Our families, do they belong to us? Our histories, how much of it affects who we are every day? And this next poem I'm going to read gets more directly into some of these questions that this book asks. So, some of you know, because I've visited classes before, my father's a paranoid schizophrenic, and as a result, he's been chronically homeless since I let him be homeless when I was about 20. But that's a tough decision to have someone out of your care and let them go. So when I was in Indonesia in June of 2012, all of this, when you're just backpacking around, it becomes the idea of home becomes very clear as you are wandering around yourself, like my father does. He just roams from city to city. And so this next poem it features Johnson Elementary, an elementary school that I went to right here. And as I'm sitting there in Indonesia, all these thoughts are coming to my mind. Just one last thing I need to tell you about the poem. It's set in Sulawesi, which is a really interesting island in Indonesia where they revere death, but seriously. When you're born, the parents start saving for your funeral. That sort of death is a positive. All the houses are painted black. All the houses are shaped like ships because the idea is that you come from the sky or heavens, and you fall from the sky, and you kind of this arc of the roof of it. This is where you are here on Earth. But you're going to fly right back out one day, and your house is a ship that's going to help you fly away. It's beautiful. I mean, the whole island is built on metaphor. This is wonderful for a poet. And they invited me to one of their funerals, and at these funerals they collect enough meat to feed everyone for a good few months. So this poem is called Pig in a Bottle. The blood too fresh for flies, a newly skinned skull left to dry. But otherwise, this dull dirt patch where animals are sacrificed is just another piece of empty ground. I'm 10,000 miles from where I grew up by S.D. Johnson Elementary. At research, we would search for a kidnapped girl also named Charlotte. We each hoped to get lucky and be the one to find her skull. See, Dad would say, we're all the same. Don't act so goody-goody. Who doesn't want to see the fat behind skin, watch a person die? In front of me, the coffin shimmers under the spread of red silk, hand-stitched with 1-inch mirrors. If I approached, I'd see pieces of myself. So I watch a boy and his wiggly muscles struggling to lift a pig who's strapped to bamboo, its grill, and grave. It thrashes out of its rope, which sends the men scrambling away. And right when I cheer this pig's escape, a warmth wets my leg as machete opens a buffalo's throat, its blood spraying like water from a sprinkler. Dad loved to tell me what he could do with the beer bottle's broken neck. Take the glass peaks to the throat. It gives like a pillow. I'm not a pillow, I'd say. Not today. Tell me, I asked once, whose neck you took the bottle to. Homeless guy, by the river after I bought him the beer. And what you need to remember, Miss Goody Goody, no one ever noticed. So, it's funny sometimes when these poems, when you write them, you get to these lines and you're almost like you don't want the lines, but you're like, okay, we got to go there and we're going to see this out. So this next poem I'm going to read is from my dad's, I guess, voice, you can say. But my father speaks of thieves. There's an epigraph from Matthew 21:13. My house shall be called the house of prayer, but ye have made it a den of thieves. Let's imagine a world of lack of luck, steady money, the way the road shortens closer to home. Let's imagine a girl of extras, freckles, glares, stories, and friends, a girl who sells rotten tomatoes at the market for more money than the good ones. Let's imagine the world as it is. Of course people were selling pigeons in the temple, that den of thieves, house of den. Need is not thievery. Let's imagine a man asking his 8-year-old for a loan. She draws up a contract on her toy box, her stuffed animals lined up like prisoners before a firing squad, everyone watching as she says, with interest. So, when I began to write this book, I wasn't sure how I was going to go about it, mainly because I I personally wasn't that comfortable with the subject matter, and so how I was able to process that is I kept like fragmenting the story into many smaller stories or larger stories, however you want to look at it, be that of my own childhood, but also this idea of what is home, what is family, what is our responsibility to one another. And I also wanted to bring in other voices, like my father's, some doctors, but also anthropologists, because what I really found that got me through the writing of this book, I guess you could say, was thinking about us way back. Let's go way back to when we first created this idea of home. This was a creation. The idea of home was an invention, like matches or a lighter or anything like that. So we know that about 15,000 years ago was like the first documented human settlement, but pair bonding began way sooner than that. So I guess you could look at that as perhaps the beginning of a very small community. That was around like 1.8 million years ago. Now, what's fascinating is about 10 years ago, this one anthropologist from Harvard proposed the idea that one of the single most important changes in our history that changed our brain, how our brains were made up, that changed how our guts were made up, that even changed like our teeth and our jaw, was cooking. That single thing suddenly created us, what we are today, because with cooking, what the fire did were things that our bodies used to have to do. So the fire was able to break down the food, also using the knives that chopped everything up. Before that, we were doing it all. Our teeth were doing it all, our hands were doing it all. And so using fire, that allowed us to suddenly be able to take energy, if we think of calories as energy, for something else, and we used it for thinking, creating art. But still, you have to think about the first couple episodes of when someone's trying to sit down to cook, because that in itself takes a lot of cooperation, doesn't it? Like you have to lay out all the goods, and you have to have a sort of understanding. Don't eat that. I'm doing something with that. I'll give it to you later. I mean, just imagine yourself like cooking on your floor with your dog around and see how far you get. So what they're also finding is that when we started to cook, our temperaments drastically changed because we started to select for calmer, more cooperative members of our groups. Fascinating, cooking. You wouldn't think it. So the whole second section kind of breaks all this down. I'm not going to read that because it's rather long. It's about 18 pages. But I am going to read just a couple of, I think just three sections, just to give you a sense of how the book opens up into the longer histories of our family. We were born from wood and fire, roasting small mammals as we sat in circles, the sizzle spit, a fat, striking flame. And outside the circle, darkness, stalk of hyena, crick shift of his step, then man lifting a torch, jab, jab, jabbing that dark until the sounds flee back to the quiet, to the sizzle spits, shifts of logs carboned and bone thin, ashed by morning. Biological anthropologists are discovering that, quote, we were born from wood and fire is less figurative than it seemed. Taming fire led to cooking, which led to more calories, which led to bigger brains, to language, speech, communities with clusters of moms, dads, Bobbies, and Sallys. But with everything gained, there is loss. What's the equation for this? Simply 1 + 1 is no longer 1. With taming fire, what was lost? Feeding oneself one fruit, one nut, one leaf as monkeys feed ended with control of fire. We became communal, became communities of who does what, who scoops honey from hives, who cuts tongue from antelope, who scrapes corn from husk. We became arranged into cooks and hunters, husbands and wives, into worlds of many small fires, many small roofs, fathers and daughters, lovers and exes, connected by a desire to forget our histories. going to read one more poem from this book and then read you guys some new stuff I've been working on. This one's called Lemons Are Not Nipples. Yeah. Oh, okay. Wow, this is great. I like you guys. Page 77, if you're following along. This poem, this one took me a couple of years to get right. I was just so frustrated with this poem, but in the end, I decided on 2 balanced halves. Lemons are not nipples. The tip of a lemon is not a nipple. The spine of a book is not the spine of a man. No thing is anything else. These are lies a poet tells to avoid certain truths. The closest I have come to holding a dying man's hand is witnessing a buffalo slaughtered. Blood thugged out in rhythm with his tapering heartbeat, but I couldn't tell when life switched off. An hour maybe before the animal stilled. I think of my father, a man never without a suitcase or place to leave. It will happen while he waits to cross the street, bag in hand. He doesn't notice the light changing, crowd bumping his shoulders, curb empties, yet he will remain. Drivers at the red light marveling at such stillness, less a man than a metaphor, pointing someplace else. All right, let's see. Get a little water. Excuse me 1 second. So there's supposedly a really good baseball game going on tonight. Oh, y'all don't care. Wow, I appreciate that. That's unusual for me, but so this next poem, it's kind of a new one. I have a 3-year-old, and she asked me once, what would a mermaid cemetery look like? And you're like, I have no idea, but I'm totally stealing that kid. I'm gonna write a poem with it. So I'm gonna read this poem, but I read this when it was in Columbus when they were having this huge basketball game, and I'm like, this should be retitled to be what it feels like to be a poet reading during a major sporting event. So tonight's another one of those nights. We got a lot of those sporting events. Of course, there is no seaweed in this mermaid cemetery, in this spot where the blue abyss grows hard, jagged. Geologists analyze the rock layers by color, assign dates to each swatch of beige, stickered, charged a mission to sea. Not the mermaids, though. They aren't the main attraction, being dead and no longer tweeting. The gift shop, the walking robot who vacuums, the in-store deli with hamburgers served between 2 warm, crispy creams. It's hard to compete. The mermaids, they got that. Why else sing all your life to sailors who by sobered sunrise claim them unheard, unseen? So a couple of you asked me earlier what the new book is about. And I mentioned, well, I told you a little bit of the story, and I'm going to just give you the story here in poem form. Now, I don't know if this new poem that I'm getting ready to read you that started this whole book is actually ever going to be in the book. It might be like a pre-writing poem, because this is kind of like the facts of the poem, and then what I'm going to do next will hopefully explode it open a little bit. But this is called Joys Earned, and it's for a friend of mine who passed away in 2014. She was born in 1971. It's easy to forget birth and death are partners, hovering in a corner at an otherwise pleasant party. Right after the arrival of her second child, the doctor said, "It's back, the cancer." My friend writes the update now, subject heading something with the word joy. The message lists the baby's weight, his height, his favorite song, facts strung along like blue and white pennants. She tells us, too, that the doctors agree no more options exist. I read the mass email in my office, desk lumped with half-assed student essays, bowl of dum-dums, quorum of hand sanitizers. What is it that I have been worrying with? We treat these bodies like rented ponies, watch them up for the big events, tie pink ribbons and manes, then load them down again, ignore them until everything slows to a stop in a circle of circles. My friend continues with what she wishes for, wishing as if such a thing were possible. As if the cake were simply being carried from the darkened kitchen to the rest of us, searching for lights, for the right pitch, as we all lean in, candles casting a yellow circle onto her face. It's peaceful, she writes. In my 20s, I worried about what I wanted to be. Now I know. I want to be old. I know. So I was devastated after she passed away, and what I'm working on now is she died of the same disease that killed her own mother, and what I'm working on now is a series that takes that essence, but writes it more as an investigation into DNA. And so I'm setting this in the future where her DNA gets to speak, her husband's DNA gets to speak, but I also have geneticists talking in here. And I'm thinking about turning it into like this surreal fictional world, but I don't know if that just might be going too far, but we'll see what happens. But this is all from the point of view of a geneticist now. DNA's main role is the long-term storage of information, the geneticist writes, then stops. Very elegant looking, one of the other lab workers said of it. And the geneticist can't help but think, yeah, DNA is a whirl, a twist, a woman who will not have a seagull crab on her shoulder as she accepts her glass of wedding champagne. The drink tilted, but never spilling. She looks like what she is. A ladder no one can climb, a track laid for a train, a hope to continue, something more, something better, very elegant indeed. Yet what does her voice sound like? She who has never done talking. Bluebells in a field of red poppies? Or sand? Sand among sand. Or maybe there is one letter that is her voice. O, as in oh. I was hoping to see you again. What time is it? I didn't bring my 8:07. Oh, excellent. Okay. So that means I get to read a couple of other new poems for you guys. Among the Yellows. My grandfather passed away from slicing a hive in half. A nest hidden in a log. A blade thinned to a dead end. What followed was a blur of bees. A man running wild, arms twice as thick as normal, neck vibrating out to in. He died before my birth, which is maybe why I imagined this. 100 split hexagons, shining, lit gold, stirring with eggs, drips, drips, pollen-dusted eggs, yellow slits like lit apartment windows when darkness first creeps. Inside, strangers stirring about their lives. Who hasn't peered in past politeness, hoping to see what is it exactly? Clicks and hums humans make twirling their lives into order. The circles to scrub skillets, figure eights to rinse toddlers' hands, the curve to read the news, shapes and slices of the living, obligations of the alive. We've stood on this sidewalk looking in too long, hoping for something to happen, and then it does. A stranger suddenly pushes up from his chair, mouth open, arms outstretched as if to catch whatever it is that is falling, whatever it is that he loves. And we jerk just to see, what is it? What's just beyond us? Try to clarify with a honed blade, a sure swing, a clean cut into that beautiful trudge of daily duties. into that space within ourselves, the hopeful, once called souls. Okay. So I think I'm gonna change the mood just a little bit. This is a college campus after all. Let me see, I need to find this poem. This is a longer poem. This was a contest that between my husband and me. So he's a fiction writer. Are y'all aware that like the novel Frankenstein began as a contest between a couple of writers to see who could create the scariest story? Okay, so yeah, so my husband comes and he tells me this story from one of his friends about visiting a bookstore, an adult bookstore. And when I heard it, I'm like, I want that. And he's like, no, I want this. So I was like, fine, let's see who can write the better piece. So this is our dueling vibrator poem. Just to let y'all know, it gets a little racy, but I you know, you can close your ears if you need to. Okay, a couple other things you should know, because this is me going about it. I love reading the Best American Science and Nature essays every year. I just mine that stuff for great metaphors. So there are some facts that come in, some mathematical equations about fishes and tanks and water, and all that's real. And I just want to, a couple of the lines are from Bonnie Ruff. It's her essay in particular, but you'll hear the lines when they come. You'll get it. Okay. Good. It's a 3-page. Okay. Spatial relations. The day before my boyfriend left for 6 weeks, he gave me a vibrator. He would say his leaving had nothing to do with it. He gave me the vibrator as a Christmas gift. A lovely royal purple thing, bulbous, like a triple scoop of ice cream. He intended for us to use it together, too. Besides, he added, I never want to be the person to prevent you from doing whatever you wanted with whomever you wanted. 2. Quote, in terms of geologic history, space was not a gift to life, but vice versa. End quote. I don't entirely understand this statement, although I suspect it relates to him and us and the vibrator, another malleable shape to fit into other malleable shapes. 3. G.J. Recloss, A. Iliopoulos, and M.K. Oliver recently formulated new equations to measure the necessary space each fish needs in a tank. Their occupational pet peeve, people who believe 1 gallon of water per inch a fish will do. Another professional who studies space and its relation to cooperation is the adult bookstore owner who sold the vibrator. His occupational pet peeve, he explained to my Billy, was that when he bought the shop, it was all about, as he said, cock. The previous owners were 2 men, he explained, his mouth moving like a Muppet's. He, however, possessed a more European sense, wider assortment of vibrators, lava-shaped, rabbit-eared. It's not all about the cock, he repeated. Women know that, and the French. 4. The more aggressive the creature, the more space he needs, according to Recloss, Iliopoulos, and Oliver. A peaceful fish plus a peaceful tank mate need L equals FL times 4. That's like fish length, blah, 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 just bear with me. Aggressive fish plus good swimmers, L equals FL times 5 times 1.2. Aggressive fish, poor swimmers plus ambush predator needs the most, L equals FL times 5. Interesting how good swim technique in space will almost outdo any ambush. It's the almost part that gets my attention. I just learned how to swim. It was Billy who taught me. He grew up on an island. 5. Nomadic existence, otherwise known as the consumption of space, has dominated 99% of human existence. Brain scans reveal how changing landscapes contributes to a sense of well-being, accomplishment, Perhaps finding new sexual partners is an industrialized response to nomadic tendencies. My body, a landscape, new to some, old to others. One day my boyfriend will find my landscape winter as winter. So I visit this bookstore owner. He recommends the strap-on with electric voltage for a woman to use on a man. Once, he said, a lady drugged him and he found himself cuffed to her bed. She stood in the doorway, he said, with this contraption, heavy as an engine block. You know, he said, it taught me a lesson. I can't say what, but it taught me a lesson. 6, not the strap-on, the cuffs, the drugs, but it's the image of the woman leaning against the door jamb, backlit into silhouette with her jogging pants bunched around her ankles that he focused on describing. I don't know if she ever closed that space between them or remained standing, one arm forever raised and ready. 7, 6.25 inches away, the vibrator waits in the nightstand drawer, and I reach for it. Cold to skin, a skid of chafing is all. The vibrator in hand makes me too aware of the space around me. Sometimes I like that, but most times I don't. Like how sound travels in rooms without strewn clothes or people. The knocking of echoes calls attention to the stillness. The buzz now from the vibrator, laughable, it's so loud, mocking, you need me? Space and sex, again intertwined, even in solitary sex. Last section, 8. A space of 1.4 to 2 square meters covers us. This space is known as skin. Goose-fleshed and furred, pumiced and sprayed, stippled and slapped, Replos, Iliopolis, and Oliver cannot tabulate a formula for how much space my skin needs around it. Or maybe they can. Need as measurable as that safe distance between the peaceful tank mate nipping at rising air bubbles and the predator fish who hides between the plastic fern and castle figurine. Everyone glubbing in expectation. There we have it. All right, I'm going to read 2 more poems. Does anybody have a poem? Because I know a couple of classes read the book. Anyone have a poem you'd like to hear me read? Any request? All right. Okay. I might ad-lib it just a little bit. Okay. Argument. Wind bending a grove of bamboo, thin-trunked. Sound of an opening door. I think of my father, how through him, his Oreo fat, his hardening cock, his long curled lashes, I stutter-stepped into myself, a woman in wonder. Why do you write that stuff? My father interrupts. What do you mean? About your cock? No, that right there, he says, lifting his arms, glass of OJ in one hand, Little Debbie oat milk cream pie in the other, so he stands like a lady of the scale statue, chewing a wad of snap cake. I don't understand. What do you mean? Excuse me, lost my place. What are you talking about? What's in my poems? How I see the world? All of this, he says, and circles his drink in the air. The house, our family, you and me, you think it's everything. He nods toward the window, but what's out there doesn't even begin it. I answer, yesterday I saw something I've never seen before. A canary yellow web that only one spider in the world can weave. What do you think about that? He shrugs. Charlotte, that's yesterday. Okay. All right, last poem, and then we can do some talking. This one is called Talia Chasing Grapefruit. What you need to know on this poem is Talia is a dog, a Cocker Spaniel. Yeah, Cocker Spaniel. So she, I have really been honored and lucky and just flat out privileged to be able to go to these writing residencies where you just go for extended periods of time. I like to go about 3 weeks, where all you're doing is writing. And this one place I used to go was in Costa Rica, and it was an old defunct fruit farm. So all the fruit's just like rotting down, falling off the trees. But it's kind of a gorgeous, smelly Garden of Eden in some way. But the funny thing is, the owner of it told all the locals it was a snake farm, and that's even like the sign, snake farm. So I just, my concern is you have all of these people in the town just thinking all these Americans are the dumbest for like spending all this time to go into a snake farm that they are all staying away from. Like, why would you ever go in there? But Talia was this Cocker Spaniel that just kind of ran all around. She didn't belong to anybody, and she shared her fleas with all, and we all loved her. Talia chasing grapefruit, after Robert Hass. The grapefruit rolls downhill, that motion June morning. Fruit heavy with 7 days' rain, climbing ants, plump, white-veined seeds. The wide paws of the golden spaniel flail after it like a conductor crisscrossing his arms in a final dare of energy. Evolution, somewhere then and now, went a little manic. Did a step ball change tap movement, and then the fish walked, the seed split, wet, craving more. But we should take away agency. The seed sprouted, the sprout seeded. There are limits to knowledge, limits to describing the comedic effect of Talia finally squashing her teeth into the fruit, flipping her head high and prancing by, drooling juice. Sometimes it's best when a poem fails, reminds us of what we can't obtain, like simplicity, like dog, sunlight, rolling grapefruit. Thank you, guys. So is this on? We don't know. So what would happen if I took it off? What happens? Nothing. Nothing happens at all. All right. So yeah, anybody want to ask anything about the poems?
I have a two-part question. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so
I don't think anyone's gonna fight you.
Okay. I'm really interested. So earlier today, I asked you about the second part, and you told me that you put in the second part because it just bridged everything together.
Mm-hmm.
So now I want to know about the two arguments, because at the end of the first one, your father says something, but you, or the speaker, ends the second part. So tell me why you did that.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there are a couple of poems that repeat the titles in this book, and the opening poem, I think we call it like a keynote poem, is one. That's argument which you heard, and then the last one. Maybe I should just read that, because I don't know if we've all. Yeah, I probably should just read that. And then the last one closes it up. It also has the exact same name, argument, but just two. And you'll even hear some things echoed here. Wind bending a grove of bamboo, thin trunked. Sound of an opening door. So I thought of my father, doing past tense now, of our loblollies, our axes, our history, and our longer history, detailed in tooth size, pelvis flares, hyoid bones, guts. But why? My father interrupted. I answered. Remember the globe I had as a kid? The one that sat crooked on the desk, unable to spin? The bulb inside burned out, unable to light the broken blue oceans. I've walked on dots I once pointed to. Looked down the 250 shaft where archaeologists are finding a new branch of human beings. Smelled freshly uncovered 10,000-year-old dirt. And it smells like our dirt, ripe with ash and clay, sunning bone and lost rain. Don't, he said, pointing at me, his fingers shining with sugar. I've told you 100 times, don't you ever bury me in the ground. And I've told you, this is the only story we know, the story we keep telling. how it all falls, how it all ends, a slow descent, a piling of dirt over face. Yeah, I've never read that poem out loud before. Maybe not to a group. Okay, so your question, like, why does she
Why
end?
did you open and close it like that? And then was the inversion of who started and ended the book intentional?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I thought a long time about if I wanted her to have the final word. But then I was like, it is my book. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I'm having the final word. And also, so this is, throughout the book, you'll pick up on this theme that the father is afraid of ever being tied down. And death for him is scary because he is afraid of being put in the ground, because that's, again, confining. And I think what I'm trying to get at here at the end is, I mean, that's where all of our boats are going to end up going, somehow or some way. We just can't escape it. So it's not really my decision, is kind of what I'm trying to say to my dad. You think it's my decision, but it's not my decision. This is the process. I wanted a sense of completion, because most of the time in our life, our stories don't really have a sense of completion. We have to rewrite that out in books. Yeah, that's a good question. Was that both of them? Both?
Yeah, that was
Mm-hmm.
In this book, which poem in here would you say is your personal favorite?
Oh. Well, I really like the one that Dr. Meek mentioned, Architecture of the Veil. It doesn't read well at a reading because it's lots of images, lots of associations. The more narrative poems, I think, are easier for a speaking setting. But I just really love some of the imagery in a lot of those lines. And I also like the last line, which I'll read this to you. In each of us, a stray dog forgets to ask for home. A pack of roving hounds guards the door. And while this book is very much talking about my own father trying to find his place, I think those last lines are kind of hinting at how I'm trying to do that too. This is not that unusual. So, yeah. That's a fun question. And then can I give you a second favorite? Okay. And then a second favorite is the one where my brother plays a role, Bardo 2, where he's just looking at the woman in the bikini top. But he's trying to be profound and talk to her about Buddhism all at the same time. Which, I don't know, if you just know my brother, that's really funny. So that's more just, I like him coming into my poems. He doesn't like himself coming into my poems. I don't do it that often. Yeah.
Is your chapbook about Buddhism going to be available?
No. I might. I'm looking at those poems now and seeing what they might need to do.
Okay.
Because I think they need to do something. Okay. Yeah.
This is kind of just a silly question, but did you or your husband write the better?
Good question. His is really good. He does it through the stages of a woman's development, matching the stages of a vibrator. Pretty good. I mean, so we were both trying our hands at fiction in that piece. So I don't know. I'd say he won. I'll just give it to him. I think he won. Yeah. Uh-huh.
I'm pretty new to actually reading much poetry, so my
Great.
understanding of poetry in general probably isn't that great, but a lot of poetry seems, at first glance, esoteric, like it's very much, there's a lot of references that you're trying to understand, and so as you write, do you ever think, oh, this is too much, I don't understand, or what's kind of the balance there that you try to find?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think that as, we have a lot of young writers here, that will be the question that is very much going to be governing your aesthetic. You know, your answer to that will fluctuate and will change, but that I think ultimately is maybe even what voice is. If we go outside this sense of personality in the voice. So what's kind of mine?
Yeah.
Duh. I struggle with it. Right now, I'm very much not wanting to write any poems about my life, as you can imagine. I'm waiting a little a break from that. So right now, they're moving into way more associative realms, and all of my readers, because I have my set readers, none of them are like, because they're like, no, this makes no sense. I'm like, well, I do want to I still want them to be clear, but I'm just wanting more leaps. So again, like I think it's going to just change book by book. I think that's kind of, you can, right? I mean, that's partly why I think poets like to say the speaker here is it allows a fluidity. It says, I don't have to write a poem that sounds just like that last poem. I can change some facts around. I can try on this whole new wardrobe of technique and structures and shapes and sounds. And that's okay, because each poem is its new thing. But but going back, I think a lot of people agree with you that they don't get poetry or that it's very esoteric. At the same time, so where I am now, I teach creative writing and some literature classes. I like poetry literature classes. I put so many songs in those literature classes because what I find is that where people who think they're not good at understanding poetry are very sophisticated when talking about song and all the different speakers, and they're basically having these really deep conversations to me about an unreliable narrator of Eminem, and not understanding that they're getting all the complexities of this, and so I guess my point is here, I would say trust that you do know more than maybe what you think you do, and maybe it's through taking classes. I think you can learn a little bit more about how to pick up on these names of things. Let's say you get to follow certain rhythms and styles that come out, but I bet you know more than what you're giving yourself credit for. Again, it's just like with the song. You don't try to decide everything about the song on the first listen, right? The first time you hear a song, all you're listening for is whether or not you want to hear it again. And I would say kind of look at a poem that way too, unless it's being assigned for a class. And then you do have to read it a few more times. But still, the point is the same. Like, if you love a song, you'll just keep listening to it over and over and over, and you'll slowly get all of its nuance. But don't try to do it all at once in the same poem. Probably have time for one last question. Yeah.
We have books for sale.
Oh, yeah.
You say that you get a lot of your inspiration from travel.
Yeah.
But is there some place that you like to go that's really like your safe haven for actual writing?
Yes, absolutely. So I have, you can either call it a balcony or a really lame deck on the back of my house that's like this wide. And no one goes out there because you can't even barely sit down. But I found this one little table, and that's where I start off all my mornings, is out there. It just looks out to the woods. And I have a little fox who has a little den, and I see him making his way. He's kind of lazy. I thought foxes did a lot, but they don't, I guess. At least not this one. I just get to watch him as he does his thing every day. It's pretty great. So right now it's my backyard. All the travel, you still end up in your backyard every day. But that's still great. All right. Well, thank you guys. It was great to be here.